The door's cracked. I went outside. I went to go around the whole place. I went twice. I did not see her.
Continues for that missing 8-year-old girl in Gwinnett County who police say is in danger tonight.
And what time was that? You got back yesterday? I was around, I want to say, because I came.
On a cold Georgia morning in November 2021, a little girl who loved Tweety Bird was reported missing from a hotel room. Her name was Amari. She was 8 years old, and the people who called 911 to say she had vanished, the very people who were supposed to protect her, already knew exactly where she was. Her full name was Nicole Amari Hall. She was born in Georgia, and from the very beginning, she was the kind of child who filled a room without trying. She went by Amari, her middle name, and that name, chosen with care, would become the name that an entire community would hold in grief. She was 8 years old at the time of her death, a second grader in age if not in circumstance, a little girl standing 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighing, according to court records, just 54 pounds, a number that would later speak volumes about the conditions she had been living in during the final months of her life. Amari had been diagnosed with autism. This is an important part of who she was, not a limitation to define her, but a dimension of her world. Children with autism often experience their environments with extraordinary intensity. They notice things others miss. They form deep attachments to familiar routines, to specific objects, to the people they love. For Amari, one of those attachments was to Tweety Bird, the bright yellow cartoon canary. It was the kind of small, specific detail that tells you everything about a child. She wasn't just a missing girl in a blue pajama set. She was a little girl who loved a cartoon bird enough that the jacket she wore bore that image. And the people who knew her knew that detail by heart. Those who encountered Amari in better days described her as sweet. That word, simple, unglamorous, and devastating in retrospect, was used repeatedly by people who knew her. Katie Fitch, a relative connected to the family through her son's relationship with Brittany Hall, described Amari in those terms when she spoke to reporters in the days after the child's body was found. "I don't know what happened or why her life had to end like this," Fitch said. "She was just sweet. There was nothing complicated in that word, just a child who had been kind, who had been present, who had been real, and who was now gone." Amari had 2 younger siblings, a 6-year-old sister named Zaire and a 5-year-old brother. And the 3 children were close in the way children crammed together into small living spaces become close, by necessity, yes, but also by the fierce, wordless loyalty that siblings in difficult circumstances often develop for one another. In the months before Amari's death, all 3 children were living with their mother and her partner in an extended stay hotel on Jimmy Carter Boulevard in Peachtree Corners in Gwinnett County, Georgia. The family had been staying at the Hometown Studios Hotel for approximately 3 months. Before that, according to testimony that would later emerge at trial, Brittany Hall and her children had previously lived with her parents, Amari's grandparents, Barbara and her husband. At some point, Brittany moved the children out without telling her own mother where they were going. That detail matters, because Barbara Wright, Amari's grandmother, a woman who would later stand before a courtroom and try to put language to grief that has no language, had wanted to be present in those children's lives. She had wanted to care for them. Amari's grandmother testified that she had hoped to care for Amari and her siblings, but was denied that opportunity by Amari's mother. And so, a grandmother who loved her grandchildren was kept at a distance, while behind closed hotel room doors, a horror was quietly unfolding. Gwinnett County is a sprawling suburb northeast of Atlanta, a place of strip malls, highway corridors, chain hotels, and working-class neighborhoods where families stretch dollars across weeks. The hometown studios where the Hall family lived was the kind of place people ended up when options had narrowed. Extended stay hotels occupy a strange middle space in American life, not quite home, not quite transient. Their weekly rates accessible to families who couldn't manage a security deposit and first month's rent, but needed somewhere to sleep at night. For Amari and her siblings, this had been home for 3 months. A single room with a small kitchen, a parking lot visible from the window, a hotel hallway that led nowhere in particular. Brittany Hall had told police that she homeschooled Amari and her siblings. Detectives said Brittany Hall told them she homeschooled Amari and her siblings, and they had been living at the hotel. This meant that Amari's world had contracted to the size of that hotel room and its immediate surroundings. No classroom, no teacher who might notice a bruise, no school nurse, no classmates who might tell their parents something was wrong. The structure that society builds around children to catch the ones who are falling. Amari had been removed from all of it. There were neighbors in the hotel who had glimpsed her. Lynn Hanna, a woman who lived nearby, told reporters she had seen Amari playing outside just days before she was reported missing. "The last time I saw the little girl, she was playing out here with some kids," Hanna said. "I don't know what happened." That image, a child playing outside a budget hotel, in a Tweety Bird jacket, in the Georgia November, is where we should let ourselves linger for a moment, because that is the last version of Amari that the outside world saw. A kid playing, unaware of what was already closing in. What Amari could not have known, what no child could ever be expected to know, was that the danger she faced was not from strangers or the dark unknown. It lived in the same room she slept in. It had a name, and for months, behind doors that a deadbolt could lock from the inside, that danger had been growing more violent, more deliberate, and more final. Neighbors said they were stunned when they learned what had been happening. The community that surrounded that hotel, the ordinary world of morning commutes and fast food and weekend routines, had no idea. No one did, except the 2 people who should have been protecting her most. And now, investigators were about to find out exactly who those people were and exactly what they had done. To understand how an 8-year-old girl ended up wrapped in trash bags in a Georgia forest, you have to understand the 2 women who shared that hotel room with her. You have to understand who they were before the world knew their names. You have to look at the ordinary face that violence so often wears. Because what makes cases like this so persistently, devastatingly hard to process is not that the people responsible were monsters who announced themselves. It is that they looked, to almost everyone who encountered them, like people you would pass in a parking lot and think nothing of. Celeste Alexandria Owens was 29 years old in November 2021. By the time she stood trial in December 2024, she was 32. She was the romantic partner of Brittany Nicole Hall, Amari's biological mother, and she had, at some point in the preceding months, inserted herself into the daily lives of 3 small children who were not her own. Public records and court documents do not provide a detailed portrait of Owens's childhood or family history in the way that profiles of other killers sometimes yield. What the trial record does establish is that she entered this household and quickly became its most dominant and most violent force, that she moved from girlfriend to de facto authority figure with a speed that left no room for the children to adapt, let alone resist. Owens told investigators that on the night Amari was reported missing, she had gone to her grandmother's home in Tucker and returned early the next morning. This detail, the mention of a grandmother, a home somewhere, a life before this hotel room, is one of the few personal glimpses the public record offers of Owens as a person with a history. It is a thin thread. What the record is far more detailed about is what she did. Brittany Nicole Hall was 27 years old when Amari died. She was Amari's mother, the person who had brought Amari into the world, the person Amari would have turned to in the dark, or when she was frightened, or when something hurt. State records revealed that Hall had been investigated multiple times by the Department of Human Services Division of Family and Children's Services, with previous investigations stemming from 2015 and 2017. Those investigations were listed as unsubstantiated. A 2021 report, filed in the same year Amari died, reportedly contained no allegations of abuse or neglect. The system had touched this family and moved on. State records obtained by investigators showed that Hall had previously considered putting Amari up for adoption. That detail lands with quiet weight. A mother who had, at some point, considered giving her daughter away, and who had then, reportedly, struggled with what she herself described as difficulty managing Amari's behavior. When Hall's other children were taken into custody, she told investigators that she had struggled to handle Amari's behavior. Amari had autism. She experienced the world differently. She needed patience, consistency, and specialized understanding. What she got in that hotel room was its opposite. At the time of her arrest, Brittany Hall was on probation for felony theft and assault. She was already, by the law's definition, a person who had demonstrated a prior capacity for both dishonesty and violence. And yet she had her children with her, 3 of them, the youngest 5 years old, in an extended stay hotel room in suburban Atlanta with no family oversight and no school to report bruises, and the state's most recent check having found nothing to flag. The relationship between Hall and Owens appears to have developed into something that psychologists and domestic violence researchers would recognize as a closed, controlling system. The 2 women were, by all accounts, aligned. When investigators later reviewed footage from a Nest camera that Owens kept on her phone, footage that Owens had attempted to delete, they found evidence that both women had been participating in the abuse of all 3 children. This was not a case where one partner was the abuser and the other a passive bystander who looked away. Both women hit, both women kicked, both women participated. What the warrant documents reveal about the months leading up to Amari's death is a picture of escalating, systematic cruelty that began at least as early as July 2021, 4 months before the child's body was found. The warrant claimed that in July, Owens approached Amari as she sat on the floor and with an open hand slapped her in the face, causing her head to whip back quickly. That same month, according to the warrants, Owens blindfolded a boy as he slept on the floor, then slapped him in the face and kicked him on the ground. In August, the documented violence continued. Owens was described as stomping on another child's back with her foot, then kicking her and moving her across the room. The children were also subjected to psychological cruelty deliberately designed to terrorize them into silence. The trial testimony would later reveal that the phrase "bad kids hospital" had been used as a recurring threat against the children. This was not a casual expression. It was a weapon, a scare tactic deployed to make the children afraid to speak to outsiders, afraid to report what was happening to them, afraid to reach toward any of the adults in the world beyond that hotel room who might have helped. When investigators later spoke to Amari's younger siblings after her death, one of the children used that phrase to describe where Amari had gone. The words that the child had been taught to fear had become the only language available to explain the inexplicable. Meanwhile, the world outside that hotel room continued entirely normally. A Gwinnett police sergeant testified that when he responded to the call about Amari going missing, both Hall and Owens appeared fairly calm, nothing erratic. This is the detail that makes these cases so difficult for communities to metabolize afterward. The people responsible for a child's suffering stood in front of a uniformed police officer and showed him nothing. No trembling, no giveaway. Just the face that people who have committed unspeakable acts sometimes learn to wear. The face of ordinary concern, of a mother and her partner who woke up one morning and couldn't find the little girl. By November 2021, Amari had been living in that hotel room for 3 months. Her world had contracted to its 4 walls and the people inside them. She was not in school. She had no teacher who saw her every day. She had no pediatrician visit scheduled. She had her younger brother and sister who were experiencing the same terror she was. And she had, by the evidence presented at trial, been systematically beaten over a period of months. Her 54-pound body accumulating injuries in multiple locations and multiple stages of healing, as the medical examiner would later testify. Blisters, wounds, scars. The hotel room on Jimmy Carter Boulevard was many things. It was home to 3 children. It was the place where Amari slept, where she played when she could, where she was Amari and not a case number. But by November 2021, it had also become something else entirely. It had become the place where 2 women had decided, with whatever reasoning or fury or cold calculation drove them, that an 8-year-old girl's life was not worth preserving. And on the night of November 19th, 2021, whatever had been building in those 4 walls finally broke through. The last night of Amari Hall's life began the way too many of her nights had begun in recent months, inside a hotel room that had become a place of fear, governed by rules no child should ever be made to live by. According to testimony that would later emerge at trial, on the night of November 18th, moving into November 19th, 2021, Amari came out of the bathroom with toilet paper stuffed in her mouth. Amari's younger sister testified that Amari had come out of the bathroom and she had toilet paper in her mouth. This detail, strange, specific, deeply disturbing, was part of a pattern of degradation that the children in that hotel room had been subjected to over months. It is the kind of detail that a child carries in memory because it is so particular, so impossible to misremember. Amari's little sister Zaire saw it. When Zaire was 6 years old, she remembered. According to prosecutors and the warrants filed by Gwinnett County Police, the fatal violence against Amari occurred on Friday, November 19, 2021. Warrants for Owens alleged that Amari was hit in the head several times on Friday, November 19th, and that Owens concealed her death by placing her in trash bags and dumping her body. The exact sequence of events inside that room, the full arc of what happened between those walls before Amari stopped breathing, was not captured on any recording, but the evidence assembled by investigators combined with the testimony of the surviving children and the physical condition of Amari's body, told a story of violence that had been building for months and finally reached its lethal conclusion. The medical examiner's testimony at trial was precise and devastating. Dr. James Claude Upshaw Downs, Gwinnett County's associate medical examiner, testified that Amari died from multiple blunt force injuries in multiple locations and multiple stages of healing. The phrase multiple stages of healing is a clinical term that carries enormous human weight. It means the injuries found on Amari's body were not all new. Some were older. Her body had been absorbing violence for weeks, perhaps months, healing partially, then being struck again. At just 54 pounds, her body bore scars, blisters, and wounds in various stages of healing. She was malnourished. She had fractured ribs. She had internal bleeding. The official cause of death was listed as battered child syndrome, a diagnosis that is not a single event, but the accumulated result of prolonged, repeated abuse. What happened on November 19th was, in the prosecution's framing, not an isolated incident, but the final blow in a months-long process. Prosecutor Sabrina Nizam argued, "It doesn't matter who delivered the fatal blow. Ladies and gentlemen, it was not one fatal blow. Every single blow was fatal to Amari." After Amari died, the two women in that hotel room made a series of deliberate, methodical decisions. They did not call 911. They did not seek help. They did not, in any way, reach toward the world outside that hotel room that might have intervened. Instead, the surveillance footage captured by cameras at a U-Haul rental store showed Celeste Owens on the morning of November 19th, the very day prosecutors believe Amari died, renting a moving van. A detective testified that Owens also purchased bleach and gloves that same day, 2 days before Brittany Hall reported Amari missing. Then, according to prosecutors, she drove back to the hotel, loaded Amari's body, wrapped in trash bags, sealed into a container, into the trunk of the vehicle, and drove away. Detective Randy Blackburn testified that security video, flock cameras, and cell phone location data painted a picture of Owens's movements, that she rented the U-Haul van and drove it between the hotel and the DeKalb County area near where Amari's body was found, dumped in woods close to construction debris. The mileage on the van, when returned, matched exactly the distance between those 2 points. It was approximately 27 miles, the exact mileage the defendant had driven. Amari's little sister Zaire witnessed some of what happened after. She would later testify in a Gwinnett County courtroom in words that no child should ever have to say. Zaire said that Brittany Hall tried to wake Amari up, and after that she was put in a container with a lid on it and got put in the trunk of the car and taken to the Bad Kids Hospital. That phrase, the Bad Kids Hospital, was the language Owens had used as a threat, a scare tactic against all 3 children to keep them compliant and terrified. Now it had become the only framework Zaire had to understand what had happened to her big sister. She had been told for months that the Bad Kids Hospital was where disobedient children went. And so, when her sister disappeared, that is where she believed she had gone. For 2 full days, Amari's body lay in the woods near the Stone Mill Trace neighborhood in DeKalb County, while her mother and Celeste Owens remained in that hotel room making calculations. On Sunday, November 21st, 2 days after prosecutors believe Amari died, Brittany Hall called 911. She told dispatchers her 8-year-old daughter was missing. She said she had last seen Amari in bed sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning, and that when she woke up, the child was gone. She told officers the hotel door had been deadbolted and latched from the inside, but that when she woke, it was cracked open, and she suggested Amari had left it cracked deliberately so it wouldn't wake them. The story was specific and carefully constructed. It had the texture of something rehearsed, but it had a problem. Multiple problems. Gwinnett County Police responded immediately. By late morning on November 21st, a massive search operation was underway. Helicopters, K-9 units, and the Division of Family and Children Services were all participating in a large-scale search operation that police said would be active all day. Officers went door to door. They searched the surrounding area, the nearby businesses, the parking lots. They checked surveillance cameras at the hotel. They interviewed residents. They looked everywhere that an 8-year-old girl in a Tweety Bird jacket and blue pajamas might conceivably be. She was not there because she had never left. By that evening, after nearly 34 hours of searching, police had found nothing, and they had found something else instead. The stories Brittany Hall and Celeste Owens were telling did not match. The physical evidence did not support them, and when investigators spoke to Amari's younger siblings, a 5-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl who had been in that room, what those children said stopped the search in its tracks. One child told officers that Amari had gone to the Bad Kids Hospital and then indicated she had died the morning before, while their mother had gone to get marijuana. Both women were already in custody on child cruelty charges when the critical turn came. On the morning of Tuesday, November 23rd, investigators went back, this time to the woods. Kea Jimenez, the crime scene investigation supervisor with Gwinnett County Police, described the scene in the Stone Mill Drive area. Amari's body was about 11 feet in from the curb, lying in a slight depression in the ground, partially hidden by a fallen tree and debris. Her body was located with 3 white-colored trash bags around it. One had been slipped over the head and came to an endpoint around the abdomen. The second covered the legs and stopped short of the hips, and a third was wrapped around the abdomen and torso, tied with a black-colored rope. You could still see her body through some of the trash bags. At 10:45 a.m. on November 23, 2021, the search for Amari Hall ended. Gwinnett County Police Chief J.D. McClure stood before cameras at 1 p.m. His voice was measured. His words were not. "Unfortunately, and these are not the results we hoped for," he said. And then, in one of the quieter admissions a law enforcement officer can make, the investigation found that Amari was never in fact missing. She had never been missing. She had been there all along, waiting in the cold Georgia woods for someone to come find her. The community around Stone Mill Trace, a neighborhood of ordinary houses near Stone Mountain, where people put out their trash cans on Tuesday mornings and walked dogs in the evenings, emerged from their homes to find yellow crime scene tape stretched between the trees. One neighbor told reporters they were devastated. "An 8-year-old child? I don't even know how I slept that close to that child outside like that all night," one neighbor said. "I'm just crestfallen." The investigation had just begun. But the most urgent question, where was Amari, had been answered in the worst possible way. Now came the harder one. Who was going to be held responsible, and what would it take to prove it? The moment Gwinnett County Police Chief J.D. McClure stood before cameras on the afternoon of November 23, 2021, and told the world that Amari Hall had never been missing, that she had been there all along, The investigation that had begun as a search became something else entirely. It became a case that investigators would later describe as one of the most disturbing they had ever worked. And the evidence they were about to uncover would not simply answer the question of what happened to Amari. It would reconstruct, piece by meticulous piece, a months-long record of cruelty that had been hiding in plain sight. The transition from missing persons case to homicide had begun before Amari's body was even found. A homicide detective testified that 24 hours into the search for the missing child, the case had already shifted. Detective Randy Blackburn explained this was transitioning from a missing juvenile to a homicide investigation after Special Victims Unit detectives reviewed Owens's phone search history. What they found on that phone was a window into the mind of someone who had just done something irreversible and was trying, in real time, to work out what to do next. The searches included what to do when a child just doesn't listen, lakes near me, how do sewers on the streets work, why do kids run away, how do I report someone missing, and U-Haul customer account. Read together, those searches tell a story. They are not the searches of a grieving, frantic parent whose child has vanished. They are the searches of someone who has a problem and is solving it. Lakes near me. How do sewers on the streets work? These were not curiosities. These were disposal options being weighed and discarded in sequence. The phone did not lie, even after Owens attempted to delete its contents. While searching for the child, investigators found deleted videos from a Nest camera on Owens's cell phone depicting both women hitting and kicking the children. Forensic recovery of deleted data had cracked the concealment wide open. The key breakthrough that led investigators directly to Amari's body came from a single detail buried in Owens's phone data: a U-Haul reservation. Investigators credited information from a U-Haul reservation on Owens's cell phone as the clue that helped them locate Amari. Surveillance footage placed Owens at the U-Haul rental location at A1 Mini Storage on November 19th, the same day prosecutors believed Amari died. The same cameras captured her at a nearby dollar store. Detective Blackburn testified that Owens was also seen buying cleaning products like bleach and latex gloves from a dollar store while renting the U-Haul. Each purchase was methodical. Each stop was recorded. The cameras that lined the ordinary arteries of suburban Georgia, the storage facilities, the dollar stores, the intersections, had captured everything. Detectives mapped Owens' route from the hotel to the rental location to the dollar store, back to the hotel, and then south into DeKalb County toward the Stone Mill Drive area near Stone Mountain. Investigators tracked the mileage that Owens put on the van. It was approximately 27 miles, the exact mileage the defendant had driven on November 19, 2021, Detective Blackburn testified. The van's odometer had kept a record she couldn't delete. Both Brittany Hall and Celeste Owens had been arrested on child cruelty charges before Amari's body was found, the result of the immediate investigation into the surviving children, who bore bruises and injuries visible to the officers who responded to the hotel. When police spoke to Amari's younger siblings, a 5-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, what those children said transformed the case. The young girl told investigators that the woman she called Dad, Owens, had taken Amari away and that she was not coming back. Owens was confronted during her interrogation when police told her that Amari's younger sister had said that the woman she called Dad had took her last night and she's not coming back. During that interrogation, Owens maintained her denials. She told detectives, "If I did it, I damn sure wouldn't be in that hotel room. I would be gone on the run." She had stayed. She had reported Amari missing. She had stood in front of officers with the composed face of someone who had nothing to hide. And the investigators who sat across from her had measured every word, weighed every inconsistency, and gone back to the evidence. In February 2022, a Gwinnett County grand jury moved formally. The grand jury indicted both Brittany Hall and Celeste Owens on 17 counts each, including malice murder, felony murder, several counts of cruelty to children in the first degree, concealing the death of another, and 2 counts of false statements. At their bond hearing, Judge Angela Duncan denied both women any release. The judge told them they were certainly a risk to witnesses and a danger to remaining children that are alive, and a risk of flight with no stable residence and no familial support. They would remain in Gwinnett County Jail to await trial. The trial of Celeste Owens, the first of the 2, began in December 2024, more than 3 years after Amari's body was found in those Georgia woods. Gwinnett County Superior Court became, for 1 week in December, the place where the full weight of what had happened to that 8-year-old girl was laid before a jury of 12 people who had no choice but to look at all of it. Jurors on Wednesday saw video after video from Celeste Owens' own phone of Amari Hall and her younger siblings being physically abused, hit over and over. It was so disturbing. The police corporal on the stand repeatedly cringed, looked away, or closed his eyes to avoid it as his jaw tightened. A law enforcement officer, a person professionally trained to process difficult evidence, could not watch without flinching. The jury had no choice but to watch it all. Then came the testimony that silenced the courtroom most completely. Amari's little sister Zaire, now 9 years old, took the stand. She testified that Brittany Hall had tried to wake Amari up, and after that, she was put in a container with a lid on it and got put in the trunk of the car and driven to the Bad Kids Hospital. A child, I describing in the only language available to her what she had witnessed done to her big sister. There is no legal term for what it costs a 6-year-old to carry that memory for 3 years, until a courtroom asks her to give it back. The medical examiner's testimony completed the picture. Dr. James Claude Upshaw Downs testified that Amari died from multiple blunt force injuries in multiple locations and multiple stages of healing, with signs of malnutrition and battered child syndrome contributing to her death. Amari had a lacerated liver. She had fractured ribs. She had internal bleeding. At 54 pounds, she had been malnourished to a degree that reflected months of deliberate deprivation alongside the violence. The defense called no witnesses. Attorney Robert Greenwald argued that there was no conclusive evidence specifically linking Owens to the fatal blow. The jury began deliberating on the afternoon of Friday, December 13, 2024. It took them less than 2 hours. Guilty on all 21 counts. Celeste Owens sat motionless as the verdict was read. She did not speak. She did not react. Judge Angela Duncan looked at her and then spoke words that the courtroom would carry out into the world. "This is by far the most heinous evil that I have seen in my entire career," Judge Duncan said. "It is something I will never understand, nor will I ever forget it." And then, directly to Owens, "You will never see the light of day to perpetrate this type of behavior, cruelty, and evilness upon another person." Owens was sentenced to life in prison, plus 235 consecutive years, and without the possibility of parole. Amari's grandmother, Barbara Wright, stood before the court to speak. She had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. "My heart is empty. I miss Amari every day," Wright said, fighting back tears. "My heart is broken in millions of pieces that I have not been able to put back together. I talk to her like she's still here. There are days when I can hear her voice." Amari's aunt, Takara Wright, also spoke to the judge. Her words were briefer and rawer. "Respectfully, Judge, I hope she burns in hell." Then came the second reckoning. In September 2025, Brittany Nicole Hall, Amari's own mother, appeared before the court not for a trial, but to enter a plea. Brittany Hall, 31, pleaded guilty to felony murder, 11 counts of child cruelty, concealing a death, and making false statements. When she was sentenced to life in prison, Gwinnett County District Attorney Patsy Austin Gatson said in a statement, "This mother failed to protect her children and joined in the abuse. This ended tragically." Both women were now where they would remain for the rest of their natural lives, and the 2 children who had survived that hotel room, Zaire and her younger brother, were no longer in state custody. They were somewhere else, somewhere safer, with people who loved them. The justice system had done what it was built to do. But for a grandmother who talks to a child who can no longer answer back, that was never quite going to be enough.